Hey guys, how's it going? It is your boy, Manga Man True, and I'm here to do my breakdown for My Hero Academia, Season 6, Episode 8, The League of Villains vs. Class 1A. So, let's dive right into this breakdown. So, this episode covers Chapter 279, page 3, as well as pages 5 through 19, chapters 280, 281, and the first 4 chapters of 282. And pretty much the first few minutes of this episode is pretty much recap from what we saw with the last episode, where Class 1A as well as Momo gains the determination to go up against Gigantomachia. And after that recap, we pretty much get Momo explaining the plan and how to enact the plan to the rest of the class to how to stop Gigantomachia using the anesthetic containers that she has and throwing it in Gigantomachia's mouth to eventually sedate him. And after she finished explaining it, we get to see the students actually get the plan into motion, seeing the character of Mudman creating the mud and making it soft for Gigantomachia to fall in, as well as Mineta tying his balls to ropes to eventually lead to them having something to grab onto Gigantomachia and stick to him. And we do have a small moment where we get to see Mina questioning whether or not Midnight is okay, which is going to play a massive role not only later on in this episode, but potentially later on in this series. So yes, as they have finally finished preparing the traps, we get to see Gigantomachia actually fall into the trap, where we get a closer look of the League of Villains on his back, which is in the anime and as well as in the manga, but it's a lot more clearer in the anime. And as we see the students attempting to pull Gigantomachia's head closer to the ground so that they can throw the anesthetics in his mouth, we get a small shot of Toga seeming to dodge and look around for the students, specifically looking for someone in particular. And I wanted to point this out because this is a little bit more clearer in the anime than it was in the manga on what she was doing in this scene. As well as in this episode, we do get to see pretty much a one-for-one recreation of how the students interacted with the League of Villains and trying to capture them. Unfortunately, they do fail in that moment, but everything is pretty much one-to-one and done very well in that moment. And from here is where we get a slight change from the manga in the anime. Because in the manga, when the students are about to throw the anesthetic in Gigantomachia's mouth, we actually see the students taking a more active action to actually go up to Gigantomachia's mouth and throw in the anesthetic. While in the anime, we see that they are still throwing the anesthetic in his mouth, but they're doing it from a further distance. And from there, we actually do get a better clarification on what happens next when we see that Gigantomachia blows the students away, how we get to see how Dabi's fire got so big within that short amount of time, which is that he used Gigantomachia's breath to amplify his flames to spread over a longer distance. So it's cool that we got that moment in the anime because it pretty much shows how much the anime adds for clarity's sake that cannot be clarified explicitly in the manga. And a small scene that I wanted to bring up is just a slight addition in the dialogue of Dabi after he launches his attack. Because in both the anime and the manga, he's pretty much saying the exact same thing about complimenting Gigantomachia's quirks as his arm is being burnt off. And Toga responds with a question of, "Is your arm okay?" And you just have Dabi responding with "don't know" or "dunno." Which isn't in the manga, but I just enjoy that that's just his response and that they were willing to add this moment to the anime just because. And after that Dabi moment, we actually get to see Gigantomachia being restrained by Mount Lady as it's set up for the scene of Mina preparing to throw the anesthetic in Gigantomachia's mouth. And this is one of Mina's big scenes in this episode, if not this arc, and we get to see a little bit more for why that is. Because we get to see that she remembers Gigantomachia by his voice and that causes her to freeze up in that moment and almost drop the anesthetic. And I think that the scene of her transitioning from her hero costume to her being a student to show how scared she is in that moment really emphasizes how terrified she was in this moment, but still showing that she is still determined to be a hero even if Gigantomachia is about to attack her. Which we lead into another big moment with Kirishima coming in for the save on Mina. And from there, we actually do get an added scene of Mount Lady hitting the ground unconsciously, which isn't in the manga but is in the anime. And we probably get one of Kirishima's most iconic moments within the next scene of him climbing up on top of Gigantomachia and preparing to throw the vial inside of Gigantomachia's mouth. And as we get the entire scene of Kirishima having the vial break by Toka's knife and using Mina's vials to throw it in Gigantomachia's mouth, we also get another change between the anime and the manga in this moment. Because in the manga, Kirishima throws the vial in Gigantomachia's mouth, but it breaks inside of his mouth or his jaw. But in the anime, it shatters on his teeth, but it still ends up going into Gigantomachia's mouth. So it is a slight scene, but it's still a scene that I should bring up in this breakdown when it comes to the differences between the anime and the manga. But something else that I want to point out that was added to the anime is getting to see Mudman putting out the fires that were caused by Dabi, which is not something that we see in the manga, but I'm glad the anime is really applying the characters in this arc and making them do a little bit more than what they did in the manga and doing it in a way that makes sense for their power set. And from there, we even get more moments of the students trying to fight against Gigantomachia as they wait for the anesthetic to kick in, where we actually get another change between the anime and the manga. Whereas Momo is responding to Majestic to confirm that they were able to throw the anesthetic in Gigantomachia's mouth, the difference between the anime and the manga comes from Majestic's dialogue. Because in the manga, he pretty much says that he knew that Momo could do it and that she didn't disappoint him. But in the anime, he says that he knew that Momo could do it and that he has a good eye for women. When it comes to this change, it doesn't really change the character of Majestic by a significant margin, but the anime's interpretation of it gives him a little bit more character than we get in the manga. And something else that we get in the anime that isn't in the manga is actually Gigantomachia's transformation scene. Because in the manga, we get this scene of Gigantomachia's mouth coming above his head towards his eyes, and then the next time we see him, he's going full monster in this new form. But in the anime, we actually get to see that transformation in real time as he slashes the screen as we transition over to Jaku City. And this is where the rest of the episode occurs when it comes to the fight between Deku, Bakugo, and Endeavor versus Tomura Shigaraki. But before we get to that, there's something else that I forgot to bring up, is that when Kirishima and the rest of the heroes are trying to throw the vial inside of Gigantomachia's mouth, we have the OST of You Say Run playing in the background, and I just really enjoyed this callback because this is not a OST that we've actually heard in a while. And what makes this OST effective in this moment is how it's used to emphasize the hero's victory, but then immediately cuts off the moment that Gigantomachia transforms and begins to get the upper hand. Alright, now let's talk about the second half of this episode when it comes to the fighting between Shigaraki and the rest of the heroes. So I really like how the anime was able to adapt this from the manga when it comes to Shigaraki's speech. And how, as we see that Shigaraki is speaking, we get to see more of the accumulated damage of the fact that his body is not perfected, and we see the cracks beginning to grow on his body as well. And something else that I keep forgetting to bring up is the difference between Shigaraki in the anime versus Shigaraki in the manga. Because we see that in the anime, Shigaraki is heavily damaged in his right arm from the incident with Redestro. But in the manga, that arm is completely healed. And this really doesn't really affect Shigaraki's character or his powers that much. It's just something of a consistency between the anime versus the manga, and I want to see if they would keep it all the way through, especially with how hyper regeneration works and whether or not it will be able to heal that wound that is on Shigaraki. Because in theory, it shouldn't, but we don't know if that's going to be consistent in the anime versus the manga, so we're just going to have to wait and see, which is probably going to be happening next episode. But yeah, we do get Shigaraki's speech done fairly well, and even when it comes to his speech, we do get an added scene of Uraraka helping out a young crying child when it comes to the images that we see of Shigaraki speaking in the anime versus what is seen in the manga. As well as we get Shigaraki's iconic standing scene with both arms pointed in front of him done extremely well in the anime as well. And from here, we do get a strong moment of Shigaraki versus Gran Torino in this moment after his speech. And how there is a slight added moment of more blood coming out of Gran Torino's mouth when he's fighting against Shigaraki in this moment. as well as we get the slight flashback of Gran Torino and Nana Shimura giving up Nana's son, which is something that is very important because it relates to what Shigaraki has been saying in this speech about how heroes are willing to abandon their family to save others, while also showing a slight contradiction for why that may be the case. And from here, we get to a very controversial scene in the manga that is being adapted in the anime, with a slight hint of clarification for what's going on in this scene in the manga versus what's going on in the anime. And that scene is when Shigaraki crushes Gran Torino's foot and slams him into the ground. Because there seems to be this misconception that Shigaraki Tomura was literally crushing and punching Gran Torino in the chest, when in the anime, we see that it's explicitly shown that he's actually being punched in the lower stomach to abdomen area. As we see this most likely because of how Gran Torino's body is structured, with his hands are going to be closer to his lower body, aka his abdomen, than it's going to be to his upper chest. So yeah, I think this clarifies that even though Gran Torino did take a lot of damage in this fight, it's not as massive as people may believe it is. And speaking of that damage, we do get a slight change when it comes to the perspective in this moment and how it's pretty much flipped between the anime and the manga, which causes some other slight changes when it comes to the perspective of how characters are approaching Shigaraki Tomura after he literally punches Gran Torino into the ground. And from there, we do get a very great moment of Deku raging out after what happened to his mentor, as well as the perspective shot change of Shigaraki grabbing bullets out of his pocket, as well as we get this very cool moment of both Deku as well as Shigaraki passing each other in a brilliant moment that ends in a still image that was animated and drawn beautifully. And from that moment, we get another change, and this is going to be the final change in this episode between the anime and manga. Where in the manga, when you have Ryukugu coming in to stop Shigaraki, Shigaraki actually pierces both of her hands before Deku comes around and wraps around him. But in the anime, he only pierces one of her hands while Ryuku actually uses the other hand to keep him in place as Deku comes in later on. So in the anime, it doesn't show how powerful Shigaraki actually is in this form, and that is something that is emphasized a little bit more with some differences between the anime and the manga, as seen in a scene where Shigaraki elbows Deku in the stomach and less blood comes out of his mouth than in the manga. But then on the flip side, we also get moments of Deku who goes 100% Wyoming smash, smashing into Shigaraki, but also doing less damage that we see in the anime versus what we see in the manga. So those are some slight changes with the end of this episode, but it really doesn't affect the actual story and the structure and the power scaling in the anime and in the manga by a significant margin. But I want to also bring up that there is a cut scene from the manga in the anime showing Eri as we see that Shigaraki is about to launch the deleter round, but that scene is replaced with a scene or flashback of Mirio losing his quirk, so the same type of feeling still applies. And that's where the episode pretty much ends, with Shigaraki launching the deleter round into Aizawa and it hitting the mark, potentially erasing his quirk, ending the episode. And I think that this moment in the anime was done to perfection. So yeah, that's pretty much everything that I wanted to break down in this episode of My Hero Academia. So let me ask you, what did you think of the episode? Did you like it? Did you dislike it? What was your favorite part? And do you think that My Hero Academia is probably at its peak when it comes to animation? So leave your comments down below, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and don't forget to hit that notification bell to be notified for whenever I upload more content like this. Do all that cool jazz, and hopefully I'll be able to catch you in my next video. Goodbye!